we commissioned Frontier Economics to basically analyse different scenarios of regulatory alignment between the United Kingdom and the European Union, and this included estimating the impact of US tariffs on the UK and the EU economy. And what we found is that because we're a slightly more services intensive as an economy when it comes to trade with the United States, on aggregate, the US tariffs would not have a huge impact on the UK economy, but they would have a devastating impact on regions outside of London and the southeast, the more industry-intensive regions. On the European Union, they would have a much harder economic impact on the grounds that German cars, for example, would lead the negative impact on the European economy.
So let's just take this basic question of if there is a US across-the-board tariff, do you think the UK should retaliate?
What I think would be better than retaliating is pursuing a trade policy which brings us into close alignment in goods and services with the European Union, because in that way we could recoup any lost trade or any damage done to the UK and the EU economy through increasing our trade flows with the European Union, effectively for the UK's case more than offsetting the effects of any US tariffs. And in the EU's case, we could effectively reduce the effect of US tariffs on their economy by roughly a third, is what the calculation showed.
Just go over that again, just crystallise that, because this is a really significant point.
So the best way to mitigate the possibility of US tariffs is for the United Kingdom and the European Union to enter an agreement which is close alignment as applied to the SPS chapter and the Technical Barriers to Trade chapter of the TCA in particular, and if we can go further than that, to include the services chapters of the TCA as well. Because
and the uplift on the UK economy in your analysis would be what?
We would offset the impact of the tariffs pretty much completely, and for the European Union it would recoup effectively a third of the lost trade that the economy would suffer. We can provide the detailed figures afterwards.
Okay.
Policy proposal that there is around at the moment to help the government achieve its target of fastest economic growth in the G7 is indeed using the relationship reset to extract some significant improvements to the TCA. Namely, as part of this report that I mentioned earlier, we analysed what the impact would be of getting a better relationship when it comes to trading goods, so targeting SPS and technical barriers to trade chapters of the TCA. And we estimated that deep goods alignment across those two chapters could benefit the UK economy to the tune of between 1 and 1.5% GDP growth in the long term. So that's effectively saying clawing back up to a third of the GDP that we are estimated to have lost as a result of moving from European Union membership or single market membership to the TCA. And this is achievable within the negotiating red lines of no return to the single market and the customs union. If we were to include improvements to the services chapters of the TCA as well, then that number increases to 2.2%, effectively clawing back roughly half of what we are estimated to have lost as a result of the TCA. And I'd like to put this into a bit of context as well, because I agree with Dan that it isn't a binary choice between improved relations with the European Union or a free trade agreement with the US. That's not really what the debate should be about. It should be about priorities. And when it comes to priorities, then if the target is the fastest growth in the G7, then we should follow the biggest number. And the previous administration's own estimations for even optimistic estimations of the effect of an improved US-UK FTA puts the growth from that FTA at roughly 0.6% GDP 1.6% GDP in the long run, which if you compare it to between 1.5 and 2.2%, should instruct the government as to where the priorities should lie. That does not preclude negotiating a US FTA as well, but we should put most of our efforts into that EU relationship reset one, because it will bring the biggest benefit to the UK economy. And lastly, I'd like to add that when it comes to closer trading in goods with the European Union, that's when we get a real and significant redistributive effect of that GDP growth, with the industrialised areas such as, for example, the Midlands, Yorkshire and the North East benefiting the most when it comes to GVA increases compared to where we are now.
Okay, Lord Tannen?
When it comes to these industrial sectors, they're absolutely the correct ones as identified in the industrial strategy, and that's great. We obviously need any trade strategy, upcoming trade strategy, to be complementary to them, and so ensure that we are able to boost these sectors through our trade strategy as well. I'd argue that that is especially true when it comes to our relationship with the European Union, and there's two things that we can do to improve that, and that is, number one, is reduce the technical barriers to trade, make exporting and importing a lot easier, improve trade flows, and the second thing, which is almost equally as important, is providing a significant amount of regulatory certainty so that we can attract foreign direct investment and we can actually grow these sectors significantly. That does imply almost what Dan was saying at the beginning in relation to Kanzuk, where we can effectively apply that to the European Union, because we've got a very solid foundation on that, given that we were members for so long, and we can actually go ahead and pursue a policy of regulatory alignment with some sectors where we identify them to be beneficial to our interests, and we can then build on those, whether through mutual recognition of conformity assessments or just doing mutual recognition of conformity assessments independently of the regulatory alignment, in order to reduce those checks, to reduce the duplication for certification and conformity, and actually start getting our businesses, especially our SMEs, growing again and bringing that wealth and spreading it across the UK.
Lord Hannon, which aspects of that do you disagree with?
Well, I'm strongly in favour of mutual recognition deals with the EU. I don't think anyone involved with the negotiation was against that. If we could get one on agriculture of the kind that New Zealand has with the EU, I think that would be uncontroversial. And as Tom says, be very easy to do that because our standards have been identical for the better part of half a century.
Proposals have to be taken in the round. So we're talking trade specifically here. Youth mobility is obviously a key conduit to trade, says the European Union, and improving our trading relationship. We've got defence, we've got security as well. Now, I'd say we definitely need something on defence, we need something on security to be high up on the agenda because of the geopolitical pressures that we are facing as a continent, not least because of Russia's hot war of aggression in Ukraine. When it comes to trade, I think we need to be ambitious, and we need to go for, yes, the SBS agreement, as the government is already doing. We need to go for either regulatory alignment and or mutual recognition of conformity assessments on the technical barriers to trade chapter, whether that is mutual recognition of conformity assessment irrespective of alignment or not, that's for the negotiations, but they can be achieved without regulatory alignment as well. We also need to be, I think, more ambitious when it comes to services. We know we've got a stated UK government ambition for mutual recognition of professional qualifications agreement as applied to architects. We could go further than that as well. And I would also argue that we should absolutely be willing to negotiate on a youth mobility visa scheme as part of this as well.
Thank you. Marley, any quick fixes, do you think?
Agree with all of what Tom has said. The only thing I'd add is a deal to link the UK and the EU's emissions trading systems.
There's any need to speculate as to how the British public feels about this sort of stuff. There's plenty of polling surrounding food standards that is out there for people to look at, but we've also polled what the British public sees as sort of the UK's trading priorities and the relationship reset quite extensively. We commissioned YouGov to ask 15,000 people as to their views as to who the UK should prioritise trading with, and it won't be a surprise that, that 46% of respondents say it's the European Union. That compares to only 20, so less than half of that say it's the United States. That is largely because people do want closer regulatory alignment with the European Union. We asked that question too, and again we find that roughly 2 to 1 the Brits are more likely to say that they want to be aligned with the European Union when it comes to standards and protection. Where does this come from? Because over the last 10 years that we've had this public debate, it's been central to lots of the conversation we've had, and lots of people have felt the economic consequences of it moving to a TCA-type trade agreement. They've felt it through the inflationary pressures it has caused, whether it is through increased cost of living crisis, etc., and we know that this has filtered through. So I would suggest that, of course, cattle farmers in the US notwithstanding, but the British public is slightly more aware of what's going on now, and they've experienced it, and they kind of expect a better trading relationship with Europe. I'll start by agreeing with Dan that we can do both, and that we should explore both where we can. The priority should be the European Union and improving that trading relationship. The reason for that is primarily twofold. We know that it can give us the biggest boost to economic growth of any free trade agreement or trade a relationship that we have going, and we're talking orders of magnitude bigger, so between 1.5 to 2.2%, depending on whether we align on goods or goods and services in GDP growth long term, compared to 0.0 something for Australia, New Zealand, or 0.16 for a US-UK FTA. So these are not comparable in terms of the impact that they would have to the UK as a whole and communities across it. Secondly, it's because it aligns with what the public wants this government to do and what it increasingly expects it to do. And then secondly, I'd beg the question in terms of the US free trade agreement. Of course we should, if it's in our interest to do it. The question I pose is how that's going to be very difficult to manage. I know that Dan says that the US is keen on a US FTA, on a UK FTA, but the problem is that, I mean, the strapline is America first. They have just been on a round of imposing tariffs. They may impose more of them, including on us. They have been demanding access to even rare materials from Ukraine in exchange of what is existential support for them at this point in time. So I would give a good dollop of caution to any approach for a UK-US FTA, because I don't know what rare earth minerals we would have to be giving up in exchange for it as well. But the priority should be the European Union, because the economic benefits are clear to be seen, that they align with what the public would like to see as well.